Now let's go to our guest. He is at Peter Sweden7 on Twitter. You've probably seen some of his YouTube videos. He's been documenting the impact of the migrant crisis on Sweden, as well as a number of other issues. Before I go to our guest, though, I just want to read this out of Breitbart. Now, this was out in June, so this is probably about a month old now. Sex attacks at Swedish festivals have risen 1,000%. A new report has revealed that sex attacks at Swedish festivals have increased as much as 1,000% in 2016, so that's last year's figures, a trend which does not appear to be changing. Now, since that report came out, we had a number of other sexual assaults at Swedish music festivals, including the Bravalla 2018 festival. It was funny that they reacted by cancelling the festival, but then a Swedish comedian and a radio host came out and said, oh, why don't we solve this rash of sexual assaults by just banning all men? Because that's the solution, isn't it? Kind of like when they proposed banning vehicles after the Stockholm truck terrorist attack. I mean, Peter, is the problem here all men? Or is it certain kinds of men with certain beliefs about women? Which do you think is the real problem here?
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Paul. Yes, it's. I don't think it is blondes, blue-eyed Swedish people that are behind this. People like me. That's pretty certain it's not those kind of people we're talking about here. It's there was actually a police report from the 2015 VR Stockholm Festival, which saw loads of rapes. I don't have the exact figure in my head, but it was in somewhere in the 30, 40, 50 sexual assaults they had at that festival. And according to the police report, every single attacker there were migrants. Of course, this didn't make it into the press or the newspapers, but this was a leaked police report that came out. And if you look at the people that are behind most of these rapes and attacks in Sweden, it's almost every single instance where you are able to find the name and the identity of the attacker. It's almost always migrants. Particularly, you have Muhammad, you have Hassan, Bashir, this kind of very Middle Eastern sounding names.
Which is exactly what Peter Springer said, the cop who blew the whistle on crimes that he was dealing with, the ex-police chief. It was always Middle Eastern names. Some of these rapes and sexual assaults in these music festivals, which have been going on for years now, not just this summer, absolutely horrific. We're not just talking about groping. In one instance, I remember, they literally raped a woman in the middle of a field in front of a stage. I mean, it led to big acts pulling out these concerts altogether. I think Mumford and Sons was one of them. Now they're saying, oh, we're just going to cancel the concert, or we can ban all men. But again, the other angle to this, and you alluded to this, is the ethnicity of these individuals is coming out again and again. The solution to that is not to ask, why are certain individuals with certain ethnicities, certain backgrounds carrying out these assaults? The solution, and we've seen this in Germany as well, they're now saying they're just going to cover up ethnicity in crime reports altogether. And in fact, here's a headline out of Spicer, which I want to read to you. Sweden to ban alternative media. By changing the constitution, the Swedish government wants to prohibit websites that reveal the ethnicity of convicted criminals. So it appears that instead of addressing the issues raised by critics of mass immigration, Peter, the government is simply attempting to ban criticism of mass immigration altogether, right?
Yes, you're 100% correct. The Swedish government, which is a socialist government, and I would say they're bordering on communism, they're that authoritarian. They're looking to ban alternative media like Fria Tider, who are reporting on the ethnicity or race or religion of convicted of people that are convicted of crime. And then because Fria Tider, for example, is a very good alternative news source in Sweden, which I work with a bit, and they are quite good at digging up some information, some court cases. So you can see who some of these attackers are. So, for example, you have there was one Afghan guy who raped a 13-year-old girl, and he got 3 months prison. And this was completely unreported in the mainstream media, but these guys managed to dig up the info, and you could see that it was one of these migrants from Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is a great website. I translate a lot of articles from Freya Tida, I think you said it was. Yeah, and I mean, the other aspect to this is when these victims get raped, in many cases, and we've seen this in the Calais migrant camps as well, they actually apologize for being raped. So they don't want to complain about being raped, some of these individuals, because they fear they might be seen as racist simply for complaining about being raped. And that's also reflected with the authorities who, as you said, these rapists are sometimes out within 3 months. We're talking about migrants who sexually molest children in some cases. Oh, but they claim to be minors themselves, so they can't be hit with the full brunt of the law. And then we had a study in Sweden. I think it was, what was it, 2/3 of self-proclaimed child migrants, I think it was around that number, maybe higher, maybe even 75%. They did studies, they did bone density studies into the migrants claiming to be children in Sweden, and found that it was either 2/3 or 3/4 were adults. They were completely lying, and they lie to get away with crimes, to get away with lesser punishments, right? And that was a Swedish government study, correct?
Yes, that's from the Swedish police, actually, that study that you just quoted there. Yes, if you look at almost every single one of these rape attacks, they always claim to be children. And in almost every single instance, the court just takes them on their word and sentences them to as children, basically. So, for example, I have one example recently here, a 16-year-old girl that was gang raped by 3 migrants. 2 of them claimed to be under 18. And they only got, one guy got 10 months youth care, not prison, but youth care. And the other guy got 1 year's youth care. I mean, youth care is quite nice in Sweden. You know, you're locked in a building, but you get everything you want. You know, PlayStation, everything. It's not like a prison at all. It's a youth care, and they just have to claim to be under 18, to be children, and they get these sentences in Sweden. It's insane because of political correctness.
Exactly. It's the tolerance. You have to believe them. And I mean, there's this whole atmosphere in Sweden, and it was emphasized after Trump came out with his last night in Sweden thing, which of course the left and the liberal media all jumped on. They were like, oh my God, look, he's been proven spectacularly wrong. The very next night, there were huge riots, mass burnings of cars, as happened all the time. Oh, and the media suddenly didn't want to talk about Sweden. They suddenly changed the subject after real events began to prove Donald Trump right, and they tried to...
It became a bit inconvenient.
Well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it became a bit inconvenient to report on Sweden all of a sudden. Yeah, it's been, when you mention these kind of riots in Sweden, that's happening a lot more than you think. So Rinkeby, which there were riots the night after Trump's tweet, or where he spoke at a rally. Rinkeby is just 15 minutes from where I'm in the UK at the moment, but Rinkeby is just 50 minutes from where I used to live in Sweden, and so I know these areas pretty well. And these areas are, you don't want to go in these areas. They are no-go zones for a reason. So the police, for example, whenever they go into these no-go zones, they always have special helmets to protect them from rocks. They have riot shields and extra protection, because if the police go in there, they almost every single time they get attacked with rock throwing and so on. It's a completely separate world run by these migrants, basically. And some of these no-go zones are 90, 95, almost 100% Muslim. So it's very, very much a separate society, and they don't interact with the rest of society, and that creates a lot of problems.
And even to discuss those problems in Sweden is not only seen as politically correct, but they're now talking about knocking on people's doors and naming them and shaming them in newspapers. The thing about the no-go zones is it's not just police; it's ambulance workers who are being attacked. They're being pelted by rocks. Firefighters.
But
the left media says, oh, they're not no-go zones because the police do go there. Yeah, they have to wear frigging body armor and get rocks thrown at their head. That's the very essence of the no-go zone. If you do go there, then you're going to get violently attacked. It's not a conspiracy theory. And as he said, it was actually the very night that Trump gave that speech last night in Sweden that there were these huge riots. The left was completely embarrassed by that. They suddenly stopped talking about Sweden pretty often after that. We've got an article here just illustrating the cultural impact that this has had, not just from a security perspective. New study, at least 150,000 genitally mutilated women in Sweden, 150,000 victims of female genital mutilation. And of course, most of those individuals will already have been victims of FGM before coming into the country. So this is the culture that they're importing. We had another story, Peter. Swedish government orders clinic to end treatment for rape victims in favor of treating migrants. So they actually shut down a government clinic in Stockholm devoted at least partly to treating female rape victims, of which there are many more in Sweden over the past 3-4 years, as we've seen. The rape rate has skyrocketed after they changed the definition of rape. So that whole argument, oh, that's just because they changed the definition, that's complete nonsense. Yeah. It kept on skyrocketing after that, correct?
Yes, the left always goes on about this changing definition of the rape, and that's supposedly the reason why rape has increased so much. Well, if you look at this year, so far the first 6 months in 2017, we had a 14% increase of rapes in Sweden compared to the same period last year. Yes, even with the so-called new definition, it's still continued to rise like a rocket, the rape statistics. So in total, the first 6 months this year, we had 3,430 rapes, of which 43% of those were actually, the victims were actually children. So we're actually talking about pedophilia here. You wouldn't think that's an insane number. And when you think that Sweden is a small country, it's only 10 million people living in Sweden, the statistic gets really, really bad. And if you look at other crimes as well, such as violent shooting and other violent crimes, that has continued to rise over the years as more migrants are poured in Sweden as well. Which I say, these two things combined would tend to kind of debunk this whole thing about very broad definition of rape that the left keeps claiming. Because the statistics of violent crime has continued to rise at the same rate, roughly, as the statistic with rape. And it has continued, and because they correlate with the amount of migrants coming in, I would say that this so-called broad definition of rape that the left talks about isn't really valid. I would say it's a kind of it's fake news.
Exactly. It doesn't explain the spike after that definition was changed, because it kept going up and up in correlation with the migrants coming in. Yeah.
Yes, and
also 90%, Peter, 90% of shootings in Sweden, we had this article, are being done by migrants. So again, the correlation between the violent crime, the violent assaults. The one positive out of Sweden, Peter, which we don't see in a lot of other European countries, like France, is the fact that certainly due to, according to the most recent polls, Sweden Democrats, which is the conservative anti-mass immigration party, I should say, is the most popular party. You have a big election coming up next year. Do they have the momentum to win that election?
I have a feeling that the Swedish Democrats will win the next election. That's my gut feeling. A lot of Swedish people are beginning to, more and more Swedish people are beginning to wake up and are quite upset at the situation in Sweden. As for them being conservative, not that conservative compared to America maybe, but very conservative compared to other parties in Sweden. They are the most right-wing kind of big party.
Anything right of Mao is conservative in Sweden. So you think they've got a good chance? I mean, this is really emphasizes it for me. It's so bad. You know, you've got people claiming there's no problem in Sweden because of mass immigration. If that was the case, why is the only anti-mass immigration party the biggest party? That kind of suggests that Sweden has some problems, right?
Yeah, that's. I think you're onto something there. There's, and especially if you look at the Swedish Democrats, are actually the third biggest party among migrants as well. But if you look only at Swedish people, ethnic Swedish people, how they vote, there's no statistic on that. But I would definitely say that's probably well over 50% of ethnically Swedish people who are going to vote for the Swedish Democrat in the next election. And even among migrants, as I said, they are the third biggest party. But you know, there's so many migrants in Sweden now that they all vote for the left-leaning socialist government who will continue to have open borders. So all of the migrants obviously vote for the left. So they won't vote for the Swedish Democrats.
Exactly. Now you're going to Sicily soon. Tell us what you hope to learn there, because that is really ground zero of what's happening, right?
Correct. Yes, I'm going to Sicily in about a week's time, and because in Sicily is the front line of the migrant crisis, so I want to go there on the ground to see what's actually happening, because that's the first stop of all the problems that we see in Western Europe. Because all the migrants, many of the migrants, they come up from Africa, and they get put out in these little dingy kind of rubber boats by human traffickers outside the coast of Libya.
Okay, Peter, hold that thought. We got a break coming up. We'll be back with Peter Sweden after this break. Infowars.com. Stay tuned. Final segment of the Alex Jones Show. We're talking to Peter Sweden. Peter, you were cut off there. You were talking about your trip to Sicily. Tell us again about that and how people can find you on Twitter and YouTube.
Yes, so I'm going to Sicily here in a week's time, roughly, where I will be reporting on the front lines of the migrant crisis, because that's ground zero for the migrant crisis. So I want to see what's actually happening there, and because that's where all the migrants are coming up to the rest of Europe, to Germany, France, the UK, Sweden, and yeah, so I'll be going on the ground there, reporting on the ships coming in, you know, see if we get some interviews with some of the migrants, perhaps. Probably see if we can interview some of the workers, the NGO workers, interviewing locals there, see what they think about what's going on, and you know, we'll be able to see what's actually going on the ground, because the mainstream media simply isn't covering this stuff. They keep quiet about it, and because these NGO vessels, they go, as you talked about in your video earlier. The NGO vessels, they go down to the coast of Libya and they pick these migrants up, basically a taxi service up to Europe, up to Italy.
Exactly, and they're in communication with the criminal people smugglers. We need these people arrested and prosecuted. That's the only thing that's going to fix it. And maybe you can get some actual footage of the migrant boats coming in, and the fact that the vast majority of them are fighting age males. Of course, the media doesn't show you that. They find a few women and children, and that's what's on the evening news, because they want to control that narrative. Peter, tell people where they can find you on Twitter and YouTube.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at PeterSweden7, and you can also find my YouTube, Peter Sweden. That's me on YouTube and Twitter. I'm also on Gab as well. I don't use it as much, but I'm there as well, at Peter Sweden there.
Okay, and I encourage people to support your trip to Sicily by donating. We'll be sure to get you back on the show after that to get your report on ground zero of the contrived migrant crisis. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
What could be more triggering to libtards than my face and this slogan? Get your new premium quality "Conservatism is the new counterculture" t-shirt right now at InfoWarsStore.com and let the butthurt commence.